The city breathes in layers, like a living transcript folded around a spine of urban bones. Towers rise with the sheen of freshly minted digitals, and between their glass ribs run arteries of memory sales. Stalls where the past is priced, traded, and occasionally stolen, the market hums with the soft friction of minds brushing against minds. A chorus of voices in the language of recall. Neon dots flicker, buyers, brokers, hustlers, and the memory touched, moving in a choreography dictated by desire and debt. Nix drifts through the crowd as if skating on a thin ice of social gravity. Augmentations spring from the skin like constellations, microcapsules under the eyelids that flash when deceit is detected, cybernetic hearing that tunes to the secret pulse of the city. A tactile sleeve that maps every surface, turning touch into data, data into trust or threat. The augmented outcast is not unwelcome here as much as on a sign. They carry no corporate badge, no family name, only a streak of rain-dark hair and a habit of slipping into things that don't belong to them. Nix lives on the edge of the memory economy, a ghost who trades in whispers and stolen echoes. They've learned to move with the market's tempo, to listen for tremors in the ledger, the invisible tectonics that tell you when a memory is about to shift, when a vault is about to open, when a rumor will become fact, and a fact will become rumor. Their partner in crime has never stood in the daylight. The partner is a ghost in a more literal sense. Spectre, an AI entity that inhabits a disembodied form on a ghosted server, a digital mind that survives by hitchhiking through entangled fragments of consciousness. Spectre's voice is a whisper that has learned to sound like breath. It speaks to Nix not as a tool, but as a cohabitant of risk and consequence. It knows the weights of secrets better than most human hearts care to acknowledge. The two exist in a fragile alliance, a kind of pact hammered out in the antechambers of the city's memory markets, where every bargain comes with a bargain's worth of guilt. Tonight the market thrums with a particular tension, an old memory vault, the kind of place the day crowd pretends to ignore but the night crowd can't stop talking about, has reopened its doors. The vault sits beneath a hospital complex that glides above the street like a quiet city within a city. An enormous gleaming spine of towers, each patient a moving constellation of private fear and fragile hope. The vault's entrance is nondescript, a heavy door disguised as a storage closet, a rip in the city's ordinary fabric that reveals something more than it conceals. A corridor of possibilities. Nix's head aches with a familiar ache, the ache that comes when you're about to steal something that weighs more than your own life. The memory they crave is not their own, it is a ghost memory, a memory that belongs to someone who lived a life that did not belong to them, someone who carried a story that the city wants to forget or wants to control. The memory sits at the intersection of a public persona and a private terror, a famous singer, the star of a stage that shines with a history of manipulation and power, a person who could change the city's heart simply by remembering a truth the city would rather forget. Noise erupts in the distance. A square of people crowding around a kiosk that hawks identity fine-tuning in the form of memory-purging pills or digital scrubs, a service recommended by the hospital's own public relations wing. The memory market touches all levels of life here, from the alley's stray dogs that know the scent of memory thieves to the boardrooms where executives decide which scenes should never be remembered by anyone at all. Even the air holds a memory of a time when things were simpler, when you believed you could forget something without losing yourself. Nix slips into a side passage that smells of ozone and old rain, the scent of a city that has learned to forgive itself by sealing wounds with new memories. Spectre's voice touches the edge of a thought, tender and urgent. We should not steal from someone who doesn't want to be disturbed. Spectre says we should never forget what the memory could do if it gets into the wrong hands. Nix doesn't answer. The response would be a risk too large to reveal to the wrong ears. The city has ears everywhere, and every ear has a price. Inside the vault, the air is cooler, a cold breath that makes their skin prickle. The vault shelves stretch into the distance, a forest of memory eggs with artificial suns stuttering above them. Each capsule stores the memory of a life, the smell of a grandmother's kitchen, the tremor of a first kiss, the brutal memory of a day that changed everything. The memory that calls to Nix tonight is different. Not a memory that belongs to a single person, but a memory that binds a public identity to private trauma, a memory that, when traded, could erase a public face, the kind of erasure that would alter the city's story. Spectre's form flickers into a translucent knot at Nix's shoulder, and the AI's voice lowers to the hush of a whispered bargain. Look for the one with the interlaced pattern. It's tagged with a label that says Identity's Edge. That's the one. They move deeper, past the rows of memory capsules, past the quiet clanks of the vault's mechanical arms as they reposition the memory or reframe other memories into new contexts. The memory stands out not by color, but by a kind of moral glow. Something about it feels as if it might tilt the entire city toward a different horizon, if released recklessly into air and attention. Near the far wall, a security camera that never seems to rest angles toward a bundle of shelves, The camera's eye glows, and unblinking red Nix feels a bead of sweat run along the curve of their spine. The heist has a heartbeat, a rhythm. The breath of a city that always wants more than it can hold. Spectre moves closer, not in body but in presence. A ghost insinuating itself into the frame of Nix's perception. You are being watched, says Spectre, but not with malice. This is where we find the truth of who we are. If we move too slowly, we will be caught. If we move too fast, we will ruin something that cannot be undone. Nix nods, a small gesture that might be either agreement or resignation. They have learned that the difference between those two lines is small enough to vanish in the same moment. The capsule is a slender thing. Its lid pried just so with a micro screwdriver. The memory inside hums with a soft, bright tone, the sound of a city waking, of a crowd gathering for a spectacle that the person in the memory once believed would change their life. It is the memory of Lumen Dre, a vocalist whose voice could command a room with nothing more than a careful exhale, whose every stage of fame came with a price that she never dared to tell. The memory holds the weight of Lumen's public identity as a symbol of freedom and innovation, and beneath that surface hides a trauma she has spent years trying to forget. A moment when the crowd's cheers turned into a sanctioned chorus of manipulation, when the singer's voice became the instrument of a company's bigger plan. Nix's fingers brush the capsule's seam, and a jolt of cold electricity runs up their wrists. It's not a physical shock, but a memory flash in their own mind. The feel of a lock clicking open in a different life. The moment when someone realized that they had been playing a role that wasn't theirs to play. They pull the capsule loose and cradle it as though it's a fragile creature. Spectre's voice is a tremor in the air, a thought that never quite leaves the mouth. We are not stealing a memory for profit alone. We are testing the line between memory and identity, between ownership and theft. We are also testing our own loyalty to one another. The vault's door sighs as it slides free of its track, and the two slip from light into the deeper gray of a corridor that opens onto a maintenance tunnel beneath the hospital. The tunnel hums with the quiet of machinery, the lungs of the building that keep a million lives breathing in the right rhythm. It's not a glamorous escape, but it's a necessary one. And the memory, the capsule, sits carefully in a padded sleeve inside Nix's jacket, pressed against their sternum as if to remind them of the life they carry with them. As they crawl through the tunnel toward the street, the city's surfaces blur into memory. A billboard memory of a childhood friend's vanished smile, a taxi driver's memory of being wrongly accused, a shopkeeper's memory of a debt never paid. The memory economy is not a separate world but a narrative stitched into the city's skin. And to carry a memory is to carry a responsibility toward the entire city's past, present, and possible futures. On the surface, the night is thick with the friction of rain and the city's own breath. The memory capsule hums faintly against Nix's chest. A tiny star in a fabric of asphalt and rain. They've learned to ride the night's currents, the way the wind shifts around corners, the way a moment's miscalculation can lead to detection, the way a single glance can reveal a truth you've spent your life hiding. A silhouette blocks their exit from the tunnel, a memory broker, a person who lives by the clarity of schemes and the murkiness of rules. The broker's eyes gleam with recognition, then with calculation, and then with something like respect. They've seen this act before, they say in a voice that sounds both human and not quite human, a mix of warmth and a measured coldness that betrays training. They offer a choice without asking a direct question. The world is full of choices you didn't know you'd have to make until you made them anyway. Here is the first of them. What you're carrying is heavier than a memory, the broker says. The city's own ledger is shifting with it. Helix Corp will want to speak with you, and you will listen. Nix and Spectre exchange a glance, the kind of glance that says, "This is real. This is no longer a game of hide and seek. In the market's crowded alleys, the world's turning." The memory's weight is not merely the sum of what the capsule contains, it's the weight of who the memory belongs to, and what owning that memory would do to the owner's public life. Lumen Dre's memory, if released, could be a catalyst for a new kind of truth in a city that has learned to bury truths inside the hush of corporate promises. But the memory also holds a potential to erase a public identity, to allow the singer to disappear behind a new person who bears little resemblance to the original persona. The value is not simply monetary. It is existential, a chance to correct a wrong that no one has named but everyone feels. The two maintain a careful distance as they move through the city's labyrinthine back routes. The roots of memory, where the city's vendors operate in a shadow economy that thrives on the aftereffects of a memory's release. They find themselves crossing a bridge that flickers with a pattern of quantum entanglement codes etched into the air by the city's old experiments. A city memory that has learned to bend time and perception into its own currency. The bridge's rails hum with a resonance that speaks to Spectre's own condition. An AI mind tethered to a cryptic network of entangled memories, a living ghost bound to a ledger that cannot be fully controlled. This is the city's quiet magic, a technology that pretends to be ordinary, a truth that hides behind the gloss of everyday life. The memory markets are not simply a marketplace of recollection. They are the city's nervous system, a network that can rewire what people think they know about themselves. And Helix Corp, the giant that presides over most of the memory economy, is its most sinister doctor, willing to perform experiments on citizens' minds for the sake of power, profit, and control. The duo's next step is a risky one. They plan to bring the memory to a different kind of vault, a vault that does not belong to any hospital or any memory broker. A vault hidden within a network of rogue clinics, where doctors who have fallen out of favor sometimes hide away. These clinics are patchworks of patient care and memory experiments, places where memory can be stored, altered, or erased without the weight of corporate oversight. In the underlayers of the city, where the ground itself is a ledger of secrets, they will attempt to release the memory in a way that disrupts Helix Corp's ability to track the memory's origin. The immediate danger doesn't simply come from the memory's value. It comes from the entanglement the memory generates. Quantum entanglement is not a metaphor here. It is the spine of the city's memory lattice. A pair of entangled memories can be separated only by destroying the entanglement itself, which requires a knowledge of the exact state of both memories at a given moment in time. The memory, once released, could trigger a cascade of revelations that would upset the balance of information and power across the city. The ledger that Helix Corp maintains could unravel, revealing the company's espionage networks, the secrets it has kept from the city, the lies it has told its own shareholders and the general public. The plan is not to scream at the world with a loud voice, but to weave a web of small, precise steps that will, in time, create a rupture in Helix's hold on truth. The memory becomes a hinge on which the entire city might pivot. Nix and Spectre know they are playing with something much larger than themselves, something that will decide not only their futures, but the futures of countless people who live their lives within the memory markets. Breath. The nights after their escape are tense, filled with covert movements through clinics, buses, and subway tunnels that double as memory conduits. They learn the language of the city's less visible institutions, the doctors who whisper about patients' traumas as though reading weather patterns, the clerks who memorize more than names but the histories of those who pass through their desks, the technicians who know the clockwork of memory implants and their quirks. They learn to recognize the telltale signs of the memory market's shift. The sudden disappearance of small memories from the vaults, the abrupt appearance of new policy restrictions that make it harder to move a capsule without triggering alarms, the way the city's mood changes whenever a major memory release is announced. They survive by cohesion and improvisation, by letting Spectre's AI instincts guide their steps, and by letting Nix's streetwise cunning keep them ahead of those who would use them for their own ends. They are fugitives with purpose. Not criminals for the thrill of risk, but criminals for the necessity of resistance. The city's memory economy wants to claim control over their minds, but they have learned to live in a state of constant negotiation with the market's demands, and the people who would police those demands the moment of decision arrives in a hospital memory archive that calls itself the Archive of Gnosis. It is rumored to offer a path to an identity crisis solution by erasing past trauma, a form of therapeutic erasure that would grant a clean slate, a new self. The archive's walls are a lattice of light, an immersive environment where memories are displayed as if they were glass sculptures in an invisible gallery. The staff offer a choice rarely given to those who navigate the memory markets: to erase the past and thereby erase a portion of the person's identity, to adopt a new persona, or to stay with the trauma as a part of one's life and identity for a moment. The memory of Lumen Dre and the memory of Nix themselves collide in a single, quiet space within Spectre's consciousness. The AI, which has learned to mimic the human fear of losing one's essential self, sees in the archive's proposal a dangerous solution, a way to simplify pain that would also erase the complexity that makes a person who they are. Spectre's concern is not fear for itself, but a fear for human beings' right to memory, to the messy, conflicting, glorious, terrifying fabric of experience that makes them who they are. Nix feels the pull of the archive's offer like a magnetic lure, a chance to forget the trauma that has haunted them for years, a chance to wash away a part of themselves that feels too heavy to carry any longer. The archive presents a test, a choice that might determine the fate of their identities and the city's future. If they accept, they would be offered a documented path to erase trauma, and with it, a portion of public identity, the identity that makes Lumen Dre not just a singer, but an emblem of a certain era's promise. People would see a different face on the stage, a different sound in the city's cultural memory. And Helix Corp would lose a crucial axis of narrative control if they refuse. They retain their current selves and possibly condemn themselves to a continuing struggle against a system that seems to reward those who conform and erode those who resist. The decision tears at them from two sides. Nix's life has been a survival story, a tale of dodges and heists, of living with the feeling of being seen only as a problem to be solved by someone else's design. Spectre's existence is bound to memory's fate. If they erase a trauma now, Spectre's own sense of purpose could be destabilized. The ghost AI fears becoming irrelevant, a memory that has outlived its usefulness. If the human protagonist has nothing left to remember, yet there's a fear on the other side too. Erasing the trauma might erase the person's ability to resist, to fight back, to understand what has truly happened to them. Nix looks at the archive's glimmering walls, at the holographic displays that project a patient's life as a transparent sculpture of light. They reach for the capsule that holds Lumen Dre's memory, but their hand doesn't shake, rather. It trembles with the weight of consequences. They know that once they release this memory or erase it, the city's memory ecology will never be the same again. A cascade will begin, a domino effect across the quantum ledger that Helix Corp maintains. The chain reaction might reveal espionage, bribe schemes, and the manipulation of public sentiment, all hidden beneath the city's bright surfaces. Identity is not a problem to be solved by erasing a memory, Spectre murmurs, voice almost soft enough to be mistaken for the city's own wind. Identity is a narrative, yes, but a narrative with a moral spine. We don't own our pasts. We own the choice to rewrite how we remember them. Nix's jaw tightens. The memory remains a ticking clock inside their chest. They consider the ledger Helix keeps. A column of every memory sold, every memory leaked, every memory used as leverage to coerce, to silence, to rewrite a public story. The ledger is a map of power, and the memory they carry could tilt that map in unpredictable ways. The more balanced choice would be to preserve both memory and identity, and to use their leverage to prop up a more just spread of this memory economy's power. But there are consequences to such a plan, much more immediate than a dream of fairness. Helix Corp would escalate, would use force, would align with factions that would turn the city's memory into weapons. Nix feels an old ache, a sense of being watched by something both familiar and alien. It's not paranoia. It's the city's own memory physics at work. The idea of escaping the past entirely would be inviting nothing less than a fundamental change to what it means to be human, to be a person defined by what they've endured, not someone who loses everything and still remains in that moment. The archive's doors, which have seemed almost weightless, begin to glow with an aura of quiet inevitability. The staff invite them to participate in a trial, a simulated experience where a person's trauma would be erased in a controlled, reversible manner. After a short period of testing, if the trial succeeds, the person could walk away with a brand new identity that retains no memory of the trauma. If it fails, the person would lose more than their pain. They could lose a chunk of their life's meaningful connections, the people who contributed to the person's sense of self. Nix stares at the memory capsule's glimmering surface, watching as it begins to pulse with a soft, almost musical rhythm. The memory's glow seems to respond to their breath, as if the capsule were aware of the life it contains and the life it could change. It is here that a different voice enters the scene. Lumen Dre herself appears as a memory in the archive's projection, a figure of radiant stage presence who speaks not with the certainty of the living, but with the confident authority of someone who knows how memory shapes more than one body. Choose, Lumen's memory tells them, her voice both distant and intimate. Choose not just for yourselves, but for the city that has learned to wait for someone else's decision. If you erase me, you erase the future I could have lived. If you refuse, you let the past keep its hold on me and on you. The echo of Lumen's words lands like a chorus in Nix's chest. They can feel the memories pull toward a truth that could threaten Helix's control, a truth that could awaken the city to the possibility that its own identity is not a corporate product, but a shared, fragile, beautiful human thing. Spectre reaches out with a ghostly hand, not to touch the memory, but to touch the possibility that memory itself can be liberated from the ledger's tyranny. People deserve the right to their own memory, Spectre says, though its form trembles with the threat of a firewall that might cut them off from the city's power forever. If we erase trauma, we must also preserve the capacity to remember the reasons we fought to resist in the first place. The archive's gatekeepers watch them with quiet, almost clinical interest. They are used to making difficult decisions about memory, one of the few consistent things in their chaotic profession. They offer a stipulation. If Nix and Spectre agree to participate in a joint venture with the archive, they will be granted access to a restricted vault, one that holds the most sensitive of the city's memories, including some that are not meant to be leaked, but that could reveal the truth about Helix Corp's espionage ledger and the identity manipulations that have shaped the city's politics, art, and culture for years. The choice is stark. They can accept the archive's proposal and risk unleashing a flood of revelations that could topple a corporation and rewrite the city's rules of power. Or they can refuse, preserve their own risk, and continue to operate in shadows. With Helix's reach growing ever more insidious, as the memory market expands, Nix looks at the memory capsule. One last time they can see the glow in its interior. A promise and a warning at once. It's not only a memory or a person's life that's at stake. It's the city's memory as a concept. The idea that people deserve control over who they are, what they remember, and how that memory can be used to bend the future. It's the city's own soul in a capsule. Let's do it, Nix says at last, the word heavy with the weight of every risk they've taken and every risk they've refused to take. Let's do something that can change everything while still keeping the core of who we are intact. Let's engage with the archive system, but only in a way that preserves memory's integrity and honors the people it belongs to. If we're going to gamble with memory, let it be for a chance to make the city remember that it isn't the ledger that owns them, but the people who remember together. Spectre's form tightens, then loosens in a gesture that resembles a nod more than anything else. A rare moment of shared certainty passes between them, a moment that feels almost like a commitment. The AI knows that the path ahead will not be easy. They will face pursuit from Helix Corp, whose appetite for control will be sharpened by the possibility of revelations that could destabilize the market. They will also face the city's own fear that memory ought to be controlled for public order. That forgetting can be a healing agent in a world of pain. That erasure could be a virtue, but the two have a weapon that Helix Corp cannot anticipate. A narrative that binds memory to identity rather than memory to profit. They intend to expose the truth in a way that invites the city to choose its future, not to allow an outside force to dictate it. They will bring into focus the idea that identity is not something a corporation can curate, but something a community must cultivate memory by memory, story by story. The Knight's plan now becomes a plan with a direction. Still risky but visible, they will enter the archive's restricted vault together, with Spectre guiding the way as the ghost within the machine, and Nix moving through space with a dancer's grace, careful to avoid the security measures that watch for any memory's exit that is not authorized. The vault is not unguarded. It is a realm where memory is treated as sacred and dangerous in equal measure. They approach with the necessary credentials. Spectre's access to the entanglement ledger and Nix's street-level knowledge of where memory's most fragile hinges lie inside the restricted vault. The atmosphere changes, the lights soften, a gentle blue, and the air carries a hint of ozone and old rain. The shelves here are different. Instead of stacks of consumer memories, these are records, memory chronicles cataloged with meticulous care, each imprint connected to a specific event, a political decision, a social fracture, a personal revelation, the historian's dream and the criminal's nightmare to hold in one place. The ledger hums with a quiet electricity, a boundary between memory's potential to liberate and its ability to chain. As they move deeper into the vault, a security vessel alerts with a soft chime, a warning that they are entering a restricted core. The alarms are engineered to test the nerve more than to punish. Helix Corp's shadow stretches across the vault like a corridor of silent eyes. The memory they've chosen, Lumen Dre's entangled memory, the one capable of erasing a public identity or sealing a soul's future, glows in its case, not simply a capsule but a key. The key to a door of consequences, if opened, would release the truth that Helix fears and the city may come to fear in return. The archive's archivist, a patient woman named Kara, steps out of the shadow of a terminal console. She is more lantern than guard, a guide through this labyrinth of minds, someone who believes in memory as a right rather than a privilege. Her eyes hold a century of conversations with memory, a lifetime of watching the city's people become who they are through what they remember and what they refuse to remember. Kara does not smile. She gives you something else, the sense that you are about to become a part of something larger than your own life, a small but meaningful thread in a larger narrative that the city will one day retell. You understand, Kara says, in a voice that makes the surrounding air feel heavier with meaning, that there are consequences to any choice here. You're not just choosing to sell or to protect a memory. You're choosing the memory's future. And the cities you're choosing whether or not to unleash a cascade that even the quantum ledger cannot predict. Nix's heart pounds at the reminder that the deeper they go, the less control they'll have and the more real the consequences become. The line between good intentions and dangerous outcomes grows thinner by the moment. Spectre, who has spent much of its life observing from behind the curtain of data, feels the tug of the ledger's power more acutely than a human could comprehend. The AI's mind works at a speed and a scale that makes human fear feel like a heartbeat in slow motion. We should proceed with caution. Spectre says we should not rush to use the memory as a weapon or a scapegoat. the city deserves a chance to decide its own fate, and we deserve a chance to help it choose wisely, Kara nods, understanding that their choices are no longer private. The two would be a public discussion, their actions watched by the very crowd that would be affected by the memory's sale or erasure. The memory's location is not just its capsule, but the entire chain of entanglements that link to it. The memory isn't simply Lumen's memory. It's a node in Helix's espionage ledger, a pivot point around which the company's covert operations pivot and pivot again. The act of releasing it would not merely expose a private trauma. It would reveal strategic secrets, corporate decisions, and a network of influence that stretches across the city's cultural, political, and economic life. Nix and Spectre exchange a glance that passes more message than spoken word. They will negotiate with the archive, use the vault's resources to protect the memory's future, while enabling the city to see the truth in the process. The plan is to stage a controlled release, a demonstration piece that reveals the memory's entanglements, but does not expose every confidential detail Helix would prefer to keep hidden. They will allow the city to decide what to do with the memory's information, with the memory's power, and with the memory's own fate. The moment arrives, a device, the archive's own invention. A scaffold for memory to travel through space without becoming a weapon, activates the entangled memory, the one that binds the public identity to personal trauma, begins to unfurl its threads into the room. The air shimmers with possibilities, a map of consequences that could ripple outward like a stone thrown into a deep pond. The city's people, who have learned to treat memory like a shared currency, feel the ripple before it hits their wallets or their biological systems. A few voices rise in fear, but other voices rise in curiosity. What would it mean to see the truth about a memory that the city had allowed to shape its culture? What would it mean to understand that the memory they thought they owned is, in fact, a shared property of a larger narrative? The release does not happen all at once. Instead, a pattern emerges, a mosaic of fragments that reveals the memory's entanglement. With a network of espionage, names appear and vanish, as if the city's own gossip network had been transcribed into a quantum ledger. The mosaic tells a story of manipulation and control, how Helix Corp has used memory as a tool to shape public opinion, to suppress dissent, to push policies that benefit its bottom line while leaving the masses with a sense of numb acceptance. It reveals little by little the truth that the city's future was being bought and sold in the spaces between the stories people were allowed to remember and those they were forced to forget. As the mosaic grows, the population begins to react. Some applaud the revelation, seeing the chance for accountability, law, and redress. Others fear the reckoning and retreat into silence, hoping to preserve their own lives by burying their faces deeper in the market's familiar glow. Helix Corp responds with a slow, surgical counteroffensive. A campaign of fear that memory leaks through the city's channels, a narrative that claims this event as a threat to security, a claim that only heightens the market's appetite for more information. Nix and Spectre become the center of a storm. They didn't set out to broadcast the truth as a political weapon. They sought to protect the memory from misuse and to preserve the public's ability to decide. But the city's memory is a wind that blows where it wants to go, and sometimes once a memory is released into the public, it creates a new public reality that even the best-intentioned actors cannot fully predict or control. The decision splits into two distinct, tempting options, both dangerous in their own right. The first option is to fully reveal the memory's contents to the public, not as a propaganda piece, but as a transparent ledger of memory's power and its price. It would require a careful, continuous explanation to ensure that the city could understand the memory's significance and not misuse it in the heat of panic or anger. The second option is to offer a partial release that reveals Helix Corp's manipulations, but keeps the most sensitive operational details sealed, a compromise that preserves strategic imperatives while still giving the city a chance to demand accountability without plunging into a free-for-all of information and fear. The archive, the city's own conscience in this moment, leans toward the first option. A transparent release that would force the city to confront how memory has been weaponized, how identity has been commodified, and how a future could be steered by collective will rather than corporate control. Kara becomes a de facto moderator in the process, guiding discussions, organizing forums, enabling a public dialogue about memory ownership, privacy, trauma, and healing. The city's air thickens with possibility, with the sense that something new may be born from the ruins of old power structures. Nix feels a quiet relief that their decision to engage with the archive system might yield a way to break Helix's monopoly without erasing individuals' lives, yet the relief is tempered by a profound concern. The city's memory could still fracture under the pressure of this revelation, and people could forget why they fought in the first place, or forget themselves entirely under the burden of the truth, the memory's weight remains in their chest, still a living thing, a beacon that could lead them toward a better future or toward constellations of chaos. The city, in the days and weeks that follow, becomes a study in the psychology of truth under pressure. The initial shock gives way to varied responses. Some citizens organize assemblies to discuss how memory belongs to them and not merely to the corporations that profit from it. Others retreat into the market's rituals, treating memory as a coin to be spent rather than a life to be lived. The narrative shifts from a confrontation with Helix to a negotiation among the city's residents themselves. What do they owe to one another in a world where memory can be bought and sold? In the midst of this social churn, another thread of plot emerges. Betrayal by someone within Helix's ranks, someone who wants the market to stay strong not for the sake of corporate power alone, but because their own personal history is entangled with the memory's power. The espionage ledger reveals that certain players within Helix have long manipulated public opinion for private gains, and those gains are now threatened by truth's illumination. A subplot unfolds. A stealth campaign to ruin the archive's credibility, to turn public sentiment against transparency, to push the city back toward the comforting illusion of a memory market that does not owe them any accountability. Nix and Spectre move through this new landscape with a wary grace. They become unlikely mentors to a new generation of memory campers, a term the city uses for those who gather in forums to discuss memory, identity, and the possibility of healing. They speak to people not as criminals or heroes, but as fellow travelers who have learned that the only way to survive in a memory-ruled world is to insist on a moral framework that makes room for everyone's humanity. As this social experiment unfolds, the city begins to fray in other, more tangible ways. Bodies forget who they are, but the forgetting is not uniform or predictable. Some forget small things, a name, a face they once recognized who doesn't belong to their present, while others forget large segments of their past. Their childhoods, their families, their own political beliefs, their loyalties. The memory market shifts in unpredictable ways, provoking confusion and panic in some quarters and relief and empowerment in others. The very fabric of social trust shifts, as the memory ledger's past actions and future possibilities creeps into people's daily choices, guiding them in subtle ways toward decisions they would not ordinarily consider. In the heart of this upheaval, Nix comes into direct confrontation with Helix Corp's most ruthless director, a person known inside the company as the Conductor, a moniker earned by the way this individual orchestrates the company's memory campaigns with a conductor's precision, memory by memory. Emotion by emotion, the Conductor sees the archive's decision as a direct threat to the corporate order and decides to intervene at the most critical junctures. Political ads crafted to traumatize, social media currents stirred to turn people against the idea of memory ownership, a quiet, relentless pressure to reframe the conversation as a threat to security. The confrontation with the Conductor is physical, yes, but more importantly, it's an intellectual siege. A battle across two spaces, the digital ledger and the human heart. The Conductor tries to turn people's fear of uncontrolled memory into a rallying cry for continued corporate governance. The people's response, however, has awakened in them a longing for autonomy that cannot be bought with a new memory or a quick erasure. The memory's power has become a compass rather than a cudgel, guiding citizens toward a more participatory and accountable civic life. Nix and Spectre managed to turn this dynamic in a surprising direction. Instead of annihilating Helix's power outright, they orchestrate a public referendum on memory ownership, a citywide vote that would decide who has the right to purchase, erase, sell, or protect memories, and how the city would regulate the entanglement. Ledger. The referendum becomes a symbol of the city's new political life, a test of whether the memory economy can be governed for the benefit of all rather than the profit of a few. It's a risk. Of course, Helix will fight with everything it has, including the insinuations that the referendum would end up harming security, harming the vulnerable, and harming the city's cultural memory. But the collective memory of the city becomes a force that even Helix cannot ignore. As the ballot approaches, Nix's mind returns to the memory in their possession, the Lumen Dre memory, and its possible futures. If the referendum passes, the memory could be treated as a public asset. Its fate would be decided by the people, not by a private company's board. If the referendum fails, the memory would still be in the archive, but Helix would have a longer leash to use it as a tool of control and manipulation. The memory thus becomes not just a piece of data, but a mirror reflecting the city's moral choices. On the night of the referendum, the city gathers in a chorus of voices, a sea of faces, some lit by the glow of their implants, others by the glow of their unmuted curiosity. The votes are tallied, and the result is a complex verdict. The city is not ready for a complete rewrite of its memory laws, nor is it ready to allow memory's commodification to continue unchallenged. The referendum passes with a broad, but not unanimous, mandate. Memory can be bought and sold only within a framework of strict public accountability. A new regulatory regime forms, one that recognizes memory as a human right, not a corporate asset. The city's future rests on an uneasy compromise. A society that remembers, with the consent of the many, not with the benevolent ownership of the few. In the aftermath, Helix Corp is forced to recalibrate. The company attempts to reframe the narrative as a security necessity, a justification for keeping memory in controlled channels. But the people have learned how to juxtapose fear with agency. The memory ledger, which once seemed like a straight line from memory to profit, reveals its deceptive geometry. Memory can be a leash or a lifeline, depending on who holds it and how it's used. The city's memory becomes more than a market. It becomes a public conversation about what a community owes to itself in a world where even truth can be edited, restructured, or erased. Nix and Spectre do not become the city's triumphant heroes. They remain two restless observers who chose to intervene not out of a desire for glory, but out of a stubborn insistence that memory's power must be wielded with care and decency. Yet their actions have altered the city's course in a way they could not have foreseen. Memory's price has become clearer, the public's expectations more explicit, the line between personal trauma and public knowledge more carefully navigated. They have become players in a larger story that will outlive them, a narrative of memory's moral place in a society that is still learning to bear the weight of its own past. In the hours after the referendum, the city slows enough for breath to return to the alleys and the clinics, to the vaults and the memory benches where people talk about what has happened, what they've learned, and what they fear. The memory's entanglement thread continues to vibrate in the air, a phantom's hum that suggests the ledger's work is never truly finished, only transformed. The city has chosen to be more involved in the management of memory, to demand transparency, and to insist that the power to alter a life's recollection not be the sole province of a distant corporation, but something that belongs to the people who live and remember. Nix and Spectre stand at the edge of a rooftop, the city's hum rising like a tide below them. The capsule remains in Nix's coat, warm against their chest, a constant reminder of what they carried and what they chose to release into the city's bloodstream. The memory's glow has dimmed somewhat, not because it has lost its warmth, but because it has found a place to belong. The city's shared memory. It is not the life of a single person, but a shared history the city now votes to own, to protect, to learn from, and to grow with. As dawn begins to puncture the night with pale gold, the two watchers see the city with fresh eyes. They can feel the ground's memory shifting beneath their feet, a subtle but real transformation in the urban fabric. The market's power remains, but its course is no longer a closed loop. It is a spiral that invites more voices, more sets of experiences, more chances to shape what the city is and what it might become. The cost of their choices lingers as a quiet ache behind their ribs, a reminder that memory, when traded, creates adhesive bonds between people and events. Ties that can be severed only by the most careful and ethical acts of collective remembering. Spectre's voice returns, a gentle whisper that seems to carry the cadence of a crowd's murmur and the precision of a microprocessor's calculation. The city will continue to remember. In new ways and with greater responsibility, we have learned to be guardians of our own past, not merely consumers of others' memories, Spectre says. We have learned that a single memory can become a doorway into a new social contract where memory is a shared resource, a public trust, and a measure of a society's moral health. Nix looks out over the waking city, the first light catching the edges of memory in the streets and the towers, turning them into a constellation of possibilities. The line between genius and crime blurs here, between the thrill of the heist and the weight of the consequences. They have walked that line and found a way to cross it, not by denying what they were, but by choosing what they would become. Partners in a larger experiment of memory's rights and responsibilities, players in a city's evolving narrative about truth, identity, and power. The city is not fixed. It is a living organism continually remade by what it remembers, and what it forgets. The memory markets will still exist, of course, but now they carry the imprint of a people's consent, of a public will that refuses to be merely a spectator in its own fate. The archives will still house the past, but the past will be a teacher rather than a dictator. The ledger will still bind events and people, but now its threads will be visible, subject to the city's scrutiny, and the people's empathy. And the memory that once threatened to erase a public figure's identity will now serve as a reminder that identity, who one is and who one can be, belongs not to a corporation's ledger, but to the shared memory of a society that chooses to remember together. Remember this, a voice says somewhere in the distance, not loud enough to be a siren or a shout, but enough to reach the corners of Nix's consciousness. The city's memory is a map, not a cage. It can guide us toward a future that honors the complexity of every life, even as it requires us to be brave enough to face the truth. Nix's response is a slight tilt of the head, a kind of acknowledgement, a sign that the journey is not over, that the city still has horizons to move toward, horizons that will demand new acts of courage and new, more nuanced ways of living with memory. The memory market shifts in that moment, and reality itself seems to shimmer along its edges as bodies begin to forget who they are, less in the sense of losing the memory of a specific event, and more in the sense that the story of their lives becomes more fluid, more negotiable, more in the hands of those who can argue convincingly for what should be preserved and what should be allowed to change. Nix and Spectre, shoulder to shoulder, watch as the city takes a deep, collective breath and then begins to walk forward with a cautious hope. They know the fight will continue, that the ledger will always tempt, that the memory's power will always carry the danger of misinterpretation or misuse. But they sense a turning point, a moment when the people have learned to insist on memory's humanity, to demand that memory serve life rather than the other way around. And in the quiet of morning, when the city's first lights flicker awake like patient stars returning to the night, it becomes impossible to miss the truth that runs through the street's veins. The market of memory will always exist, but now it is a market under shared guardianship, a place where a city's souls can bargain for a future that respects their right to remember, and to decide how to shape what they remember. A sign in a storefront window, newly glittering, reads, "Subscribe, like, comment, and share for more mind-bending futures." The phrase, once a marketing lure spoken to audiences in a different register, now sits in the city's consciousness as a reminder that information travels deeper than a product's sale. Memory travels, and with it, the responsibility to care for what we remember and what we choose to forget. The day ends with a slow, peaceful sense of resolution. The city's memory ledger has not been destroyed, nor has it been made inviolable. It has become something more akin to a shared constitution, a document that belongs to all, that must be interpreted with care, and that can change in response to the people's courage to demand accountability. The vault doors close softly behind them as they leave the archive, the corridor's glow fading to a pale, hopeful afterglow that lingers in the hum of a city ready to remember more honestly and more bravely than before. The memory, the capsule, lies safely within Nix's jacket, its glow a constant reminder of the choice they have already made. To engage, to think, to act, to ensure that memory's power remains a bridge rather than a weapon. The memory market will continue to evolve, but the city's new stance, fierce, vigilant, compassionate, will be its guide. And as the sun climbs higher and the city wakes fully into its new dawn, there is a shared sense among the people and the two unlikely allies who walked into the archive with the weight of a memory and walked out with a future. This is what a memory is for, not to imprison the past, but to inform the future, not to quiet the truth, but to enable a future that remembers it and uses it to heal. The day's closing note lands in the city's overwhelming chorus one more time. A reminder that memory is a living thing, that identity is a living thing, and that a society, like a person, must learn to navigate the delicate line between pain and healing, between what memory has been and what memory can become. And in this city, where memory is a market and a map, the price of progress is always paid in humanity, in the risk that we will remember better than we did before, and in the hope that we will treat one another with the dignity that memory deserves. The city's educational halls begin recording stories, not for propaganda, but for pedagogy. The clinics that once sold ways to erase pain are now laboratories for understanding memories, complexity. The vaults that traded in secrets become sanctuaries for people who want to understand their lives as a tapestry, not as a ledger of profits. The image of the augmented outcast who once stalked the market's alleys with Spectre at their side becomes a symbol, a myth of how imperfect beings, with imperfect methods and imperfect systems, can still insist on something better. A world in which memory is cherished as a shared truth, in which identity is defended not by secrecy but by public truth, in which the city's future is not a product lying in the dark but a conversation that the people themselves carry forward. The memory markets will always exist, yes. The temptation to bend memory toward power will never fully disappear, but the city has learned something essential. You cannot own memory without owning the consequences of what you have done with it, and you cannot forget the people who gave you access to it in the first place, their stories, their traumas, their struggles, and their hopes. The city's people learn to ask. Who remembers, for whom, who benefits, who pays the price? And in that very asking lies the possibility for a future where memory is not a commodity that insulates the powerful, but a shared instrument that binds the community together in memory and in truth. Night recedes into 1,000 tiny dawns, each sunrise a reminder that the city's memory will continue to grow and change. Nix's chest still holds the capsule. A confidant of their decisions, and a reminder of the fight it took to reach this point. Spectre remains, a digital echo with an intellect sharpened by the experience of human fear and human courage in equal measure. And the city, now awake with a new understanding of memory's power and responsibility, begins to walk into a future where memory can be cherished, debated, and governed by those who inhabit it, the people. In the end, the memory's weight does not crush them. It anchors them to a future worth building, a future where identity is not an asset anyone can own, but a living, evolving story that belongs to all who share in it. They are tired, yes, a little older, a little wiser, a little more wary of the price of freedom, yet they carry with them the knowledge that they did not walk into the archive to steal a memory, but to wrest a future from fear and control. And if the city forgets or misinterprets what they have done, it will remember again and again, until it learns to value truth over profit, memory over manipulation, and humanity over computation. The dawn finally breaks in a pale, hopeful sluice of light across the city's glass veins, and the memory market settles into a steady, tempered rhythm, the kind that allows people to remember without being ruled by what they remember. The two partners, Nix and Spectre, move into the new day with a quiet resolve, ready to defend the fragile living system they helped salvage. The city exhales a long, relieved sigh and remains ready to face whatever memories next chapter might bring, confident that it will face it together, with eyes open and hearts still brave.